Hello, guys. Welcome back to our new series, Voices of Cricket. I don't know where do we start with the introduction of our new guest, of our guest for today. Over 100 Test matches, an ICC Hall of Famer, over 8,000 Test runs, a fantastic broadcaster associated with the game for over 4 decades. David, you have been an institution yourself, I must say that, and it's such an honor to have you on board with us. Hope you're doing well.
At the moment, fine, thank you. Yeah, as you say, it's been a long involvement with the game, for which I'm very pleased, very happy, very privileged. Both as a player and a broadcaster. Somehow, we're still going. Although there's always the odd sort of blip in the line somewhere.
Yeah.
Both as a player, and then when contracts finish as broadcasters and things move on, you have to readapt. So I will take a lot of very happy memories, very proud memories, and as long as I can keep the link with the game intact for a lot longer yet, then I'll be very happy.
Yes, obviously. I mean, there are so many things to be proud of, and obviously among the ones that stand out, obviously, is to have captained England for a while, and obviously all of that. Being a former England captain yourself, how wonderful was 2019 when you saw an English captain win the World Cup? Something England around your time, they've reached the final a couple of times. They came close a lot of times, but they never really could go all the way. So how wonderful was it to watch England finally win the World Cup?
Well, it was brilliant. I was actually there on the day, not in a commentary box, not involved with the broadcast at all, but in a corporate friends box up in the mound stand. So watching from sort of that way, as opposed to that way. And as the tension mounts as a spectator, the tension. I was in a box with people who are, without giving too much away, they're used to making big decisions on big things with multi-million-pound, multi-million-dollar companies, multi-million-dollar businesses, and they were all nervous as kittens about how that game was developing. And it was a great game. To have a super over in a World Cup final, to win by literally inches, it's an extraordinary story. I mean, I'd been there in 1979 as a player when we were second favourites to West Indies and justified our billing. We had a reasonably good day for some of it, but West Indies were too strong at the end. I remember losing to India in the semi-finals the following time round, 83, which, so near yet so far. Of course, that being the year that India went on to beat the West Indies. And what a day that was. Remember that very well too. And then the next time England got close was the 92 World Cup, where I was working for Channel 9 in Australia, therefore in a commentary box this time, watching my friends and colleagues, Botham, Gooch, these guys, Alan Lamb, again get so very close. And there are lots of things one could say about that game, how easily it could have gone the other way and seen England finally win a World Cup. And then, of course, the waits went on and on and on until 2019. But when it happens, of course, it is magic. And it's long overdue as far as England was concerned. But I have to say one thing. The guy who led that team, Owen Morgan, I think is the most brilliant captain. I think he understands the one-day game exceptionally well. I think he has, if ever you meet him and you look into his eyes, you see these piercing eyes come back, which is evidence to me of a very strong character, someone who knows his own mind. I mean, and in the 4 years he had basically to develop that one-day team, he worked almost miracles with them. So I think he deserves that. He takes a lot of credit for that, albeit that it is a squad thing, a team thing, a management thing that brings everything together. But he was very much responsible for that.
Indeed.
For sure. And, David, Owen Morgan is someone who's often compared to a captain who's sort of followed in the footsteps of Mahendra Singh Dhoni because of the steely resolve, as you mentioned, and the cool and calm demeanor that he exhibits. Just a question around how the game has evolved in the last year and a half. Of course, we are in this global pandemic area scenario, and it's been extremely difficult for all sport, not just cricket, to get back to a manner of functioning like they were in 2019 or early 2020. From all of the administrators, officials, broadcasters, and of course the players and the support staff themselves. So many people traveling to different locations all over the world, having to struggle with bubbles and having to actually isolate and do hard quarantines. We've seen teams do that in Australia and New Zealand. Even Mehdi Hassan very recently came out and spoke about his experiences for Bangladesh against in New Zealand. So how have you found the current situation? How difficult personally and how challenging personally has it been? I can imagine almost everyone is in a constant state of alert. That cannot be ever comfortable.
Well, I mean, to be honest, to be absolutely frank, in my case, I've been sitting at home watching it from a distance for a lot of the last 18 months.
Yeah.
It's been the longest gap I've had away from working in the game in some capacity or other. As you know, I'm in Pakistan at the moment with the PSL and enjoying it very much because for whatever it is, 25, 26 years, I've been in commentary boxes, enjoying the privileges that come with that, but just enjoying the work, enjoying the involvement, watching the game, all these things. Being here for the PSL has been a new experience for me, which I'm enjoying, as I say, because of the work, because of the cricket, because of the hospitality. And the bubble as such is, I'm just happy with it. I'm okay with the bubble. But for those guys who've been in these bubbles since, say, I don't know, 6 months previously, I mean, for the England team, we're going back to the end of the English summer and the bubbles they had for the 2 test series and the 2 venues, which were tight, well controlled, very, very strict. The odd breach, of course, was punished very severely, serious words had. For those who've been away since, I mean, England, I could use them as the example, been in Sri Lanka, big bubble, India now, big bubble. And it has to be taken incredibly seriously until the world is able to vaccinate, until we're all able to have a little bit more confidence that we're not going to be, to put it bluntly, killed by the virus. Then these restrictions have to remain in place. And I can understand it's complicated issues, still using England as the example, of selection, of squads, of who plays what, of who has a break. And I think everyone has to be understanding of a situation that none of us have ever come across before. So if someone in a bubble is not feeling mentally well, then I'm afraid that has to be a consideration for those that run the team. So if the captain or the management with the squad spot something and they make it known to senior management, well, then the ability for someone to say, actually, I need to get out of here, I need to go home, whatever it might be, that has to be respected. And of course, that means there are very different pressures on all these players and on management teams. And of course, I mean, looking at the way, for instance, just using the last couple of months as an example, looking at the way England did well in Sri Lanka, found a team that adapted to the bubble there, played good cricket there, came to India with some confidence and were able to win that first test match. Well, then, that was despite 1 or 2 players like Bairstow going home already. And it's an extraordinary example. Bairstow goes home having scored runs, he's therefore got confidence and he wants to play, I'd assume. And yet he has to go home because that was agreed beforehand, and he comes back and gets a pair. I mean, that is the cruelest way to come back into a test, into a test team. All those air miles, it's just ridiculous in many, many ways, but it is forced upon us by situations, by circumstances beyond our control.
Indeed. I mean, we can keep talking about it. It is quite a serious situation, and all we can hope for is it can resolve in the coming days. But something along a more lighter note, we have come across a description in our research about your batting style, which says if Shakespeare had seen your batting, he would have composed a sonnet on it. So that is what we come across. Among the current crop of cricketers, if you could dedicate that compliment to someone, who would that be?
Wow, good question. Who's the most? Who plays that way now? Because I always tend to think back to people like Mahela Jayawardene, who had a real light touch on the game.
Yes.
For England, Ian Bell had a real sort of stylish style, even for a right-hander, because as we all know, left-handers automatically look better.
Yeah.
It is one of those weird things. Left-handed batsmen, for some reason, they look all right. Left-handed golfers, for some reason, look dreadful, which is why I don't play golf. I hate golf, can't stand it. I hate it with a passion, even though I tried to play it right-handed once. So it's one of those sort of things, one of those sort of tricks of the mind, I think. But who else is there around at the moment? I mean, there are, I don't know, so people like sort of KL Rahul, and he plays with a certain deft touch, as and when he's allowed to. There are people up here in Pakistan, someone like Mohammad Hafiz has sheer timing. It's it's the timers of the ball. It's actually quite interesting, just to use that example, sorry, but of the PSL. I know you're down across the border there somewhere, but to use the example of the PSL of the last 10 days or so, I mean, we've had Chris Gale, who's absolute box office, but is a big unit. You know, he's a muscle man. He's, you know, his attitude at the crease is, you know, it's a strong man. He's a strong man. And you see, yeah, it's great to watch, but that power hits the ball a long, long way. But I've seen sixes hit the last 10 days with apparently no effort whatsoever. And Mohammed Hafiz is one of those ones who's used actually, from what I hear, he's used a golfing technique and an appreciation of golf, which is maybe one of the good uses of golf, to get his timing, to get his balance, you know, to hone his technique so that he can clear the boundary without apparently trying. And I think it's fascinating because we've seen over the last, say, 10 years or so, the sort of techniques of power hitting evolve. And as we know, there are now coaches who teach nothing else. They teach power hitting, you know, techniques which the MCC had never heard of 10 years ago. You know, they might have to redo the videos, redo the books, because feet go in the wrong place, hands go in the wrong place, and yet the ball goes in the right place, 90 meters, you know, across the boundary somewhere. And that power hitting thing is extraordinary. Just, you know, and it's something you have to learn, something you have to practice. Otherwise, you don't succeed in that form of the game. But it's always nice to see. I mean, whether it's a sonnet or maybe a full-blown play or maybe whatever it might be, it's always nice to see people using just a sort of a defter touch to achieve the same results.
Indeed. Someone like a Rohit Sharma, even I think in our country, he has that little bit of, I mean, he has that comfort in his batting. Like he makes the most ridiculous of things look easy. Yeah.
Well, that's always a good sign. I mean, as I well know from my time all those years ago, 40 years ago now, if you have a good day, whether it's a Shakespearean sonnet or someone like Sir Len Hutton says he makes batting look as easy as drinking a cup of tea, they're lovely compliments to have, and you'll take that anytime. Any compliment, you know, as a human being, a pat on the back always comes very, very welcome. And when eminent people say nice things, again, that's really important. But for all those days, there are days where it goes wrong. And I'll tell you the downside. I mean, I have no sort of recrimination. I can understand it totally. But the downside is that people look at you and they say, oh, too casual, too laid back, not trying. You know, you get out for 2, 3, 4, and, you know, it's still that same language style maybe. And in your head, you were trying, because no one goes out there thinking, I want to have a bad day. Thank you very much. Today, I'd like a bad day. No, that's never the plan, you know.
Yes.
So you go out, if things go wrong, it might be the bowler's fault, it might be your fault. You are as devastated as anyone, but it gives that impression. And I've had so many people over the years say, well, were you trying this? Well, of course I was trying. I mean, there are days, in all honesty, don't tell anyone, but in all honesty, where you're not as motivated as you might be. But instead of being 100%, you might be 80%. On a bad day, you might be 60%. But you still want to, when you walk out to bat, you still want to somehow try and make it work. But as we all know, there are days where it just sort of clicks into place. And for those days, you are always eternally grateful.
Indeed.
Of course. And, you know, talking about, you know, moving from the deft touch to a little bit of an explosive aspect of cricket, of course, this is the fast bowling, you know, fast bowling that we've seen. Especially would like to veer this question more towards the Indian pace battery that we see today, because back in the day, you know, India wasn't really known for its quota of fast bowlers. It used to essentially be Kapil Dev and one more medium pacer. Then we used to generally have the spinners coming into play. But now, if you look at it, you see the likes of Bumrah, Shami, Bhuvneshwar Kumar, you know, Ishant, Umesh, etc. And you know, the production line is full of new and upcoming fast bowlers as well in India. It's a two-pronged question, David. One, of course, how different, or if I can take the liberty of saying, how impressive is it to see this level of fast bowling or this caliber of fast bowler that is being produced in India? And also, there has been talk within the circles in Australia. I'm sure this will get into England, New Zealand, and South Africa as well as we go along, about the inability to now produce quality spinners, and the talk and the desire for wanting to head into that particular scenario. Because if we look at England, from the very start, we've always had good finger spinners, at least coming in from England. Graham Swan and Monty Panesar were very, very highly talked about, and still are very highly talked about in India. And you know, they were the main two reference points for best and Jack Leach before the tour. So just a two-pronged question. Do you see England now, for ECB basically now focusing more on trying to prepare better spinners, and also a comment on the Indian pace battery?
Well, okay. Pace battery first. Yes, you're right. This is the strongest ever hand of pace bowlers that India have had. And I mean, I remember playing against Kapil, who was a very fine bowler, and went in a long, long time because he was pretty much the only bowler. And he went from being, the faster side of fast medium to fast medium, probably to a bit of medium, but a very, very fine bowler, and a whole stack of wickets to prove it. Now that you've got all these guys, you've got you can never have too many, but now you've got a good sort of 5 or 6 quality seam bowlers. And we saw, of course, the depth of talent from that tour of Australia. Before this current series between England, that tour of Australia was an extraordinary comeback. And with the injuries, with the people coming in who'd never played a Test match before, that's a really good pointer as to the depth of talent, which I think, to sort of drift off slightly, is helped by things like IPL, because the whole idea of players playing with big crowds under pressure in pressure situations, even though it's a very different form of cricket, you take that sort of experience of being under pressure with you and you adapt it with talent and technique. But no, it's great to see. I don't know how much the evolution has come, for instance, from people like Dennis Lillee 20, 30 years ago now coming to India on a regular basis to try and coach fast bowling, or whether it just happens to be a happy coincidence that everyone has emerged like this at the same time. Because in terms of spin bowling, and you're very right about the likes of Graham Swan, who for best part of a decade was an excellent finger spinner, orthodox, but with drift, with turn, with a lot of skill. And Monty, those long fingers, well, for a couple of seasons here and there, he was excellent. But you always have, I think, in every department, and you can use the West Indies as an example, you always have a golden period and a gap, maybe another golden period, then another gap. And so, for instance, the history of English spin, before Graham Swan, there was a bit of a fallow time where we had spinners, but you think, well, hang on, who were they? Because you can't really say they were brilliant. When I played, we had various spinners like Phil Edmonds, I took to India in 84-5, who was brilliant. I was a big fan of Phil. We even took a spinner, Pat Pocock, that series, who was 37 years old, because we had a bit of a gap for various other reasons in the selection process. When I first started playing Test cricket, Derek Underwood was finishing a career. He was playing for Packer, so he was out of it. But I played with him for a season or two, a series or two, when he came back from that, and he was one of the greats. So you always have this pinnacle where you find someone who is not just good, but becomes very good, then excellent, then legendary. And then while you look for the next ones, you have to accept that sometimes there will be 5, maybe 10 years where you've got people who play the role, but aren't really particularly excellent as such. That sounds harsh, but for instance, looking at, say, Don Bess at the moment, he's made a lot of progress over 2 or 3 years since he first played, but he has a lot to learn still, and consistency for a spinner is key. Jack Leach, he's been in and out the side. He hasn't played an awful lot of Test cricket. He can bowl, but he needs to do more to become one of our legendary spinners. Yet, it's still a long time to go for him to acquire such status. And in the meantime, you're right. If we have to rely on a turning pitch and Joe Root to get 5 for 8, then it proves that we don't have a long hand of spinners, because even Joe will admit that he's not a bad. He's actually deceptively good. Yeah. But he's not, but if you look at the career, he's not used himself that much. He wouldn't call himself a frontline spinner. So you just have to sort of let these things develop. Things like great batting lineups. Suddenly you have an era where you have, 6 or 7 great batsmen playing for 5 spots, which is always a healthy thing. If you have 2 or 3 great batsmen and you're fitting in a couple of goods but not extraordinary players in amongst it, well, then you're starting to cross your fingers hoping they get better very quickly. So I think all these things evolve over time. And from India's point of view at the moment, fine. Axar Patel coming in on the pitches he's bowled on is having a lovely, lovely time. And that builds confidence. But actually, if I were him, I'd be thinking, yes, that's a fantastic start to my career as a Test match player. But actually, I now want to bowl on what you might call an ordinary pitch to see how good I am when there's less help. When, when actually the first innings goes, when the game develops as you'd expect, what you might call a normal game, if there is such a thing, to develop. So, runs followed by the ball turning, followed by the ball turning even more. And when you've got to earn your wickets a bit. So, for instance, Jadeja, who was out of the series because of injury, he'd become such an important player because he was able to do things on ordinary pitches, pick up a couple of wickets here and there, not hatfuls all in one go because it's turning square, but pick up ordinary wickets and contribute, break partnerships, and you have a game that sort of is played properly that way. So I think, everyone wants to play up to a point. Batsmen would like to play on pitches where they can make runs. Bowler would like to bowl on pitches where they can take wickets. But actually, we all say quite rightly, we want as good a balance as possible between the batsmen and the bowlers to have what I would call a proper game of cricket. My first visit to subcontinent was the Jubilee Test of 1980 in Mumbai, or Bombay as it was, Mumbai. My first visit to Pakistan was 3 or 4 years later, 84. In between, we'd been to Sri Lanka for the inaugural Test match in Colombo in 82. And I have always, every year since those first visits, I have had a sort of fascination for coming to the subcontinent because cricket is different. Society, culture, the way things happen, don't happen. Obviously, a lot of things have changed in those 43 years for the good, but it's always been an absolute fascination. And although, for instance, I happily sort of tell stories without being rude, I hope, that when we went to Bombay for that Jubilee Test in 1980 and stayed at the Taj, which is one of the world's great hotels, and of course, there are many, many, many great hotels around India, Pakistan, Sri Lanka now that have grown up in that time. When we went there first, something as simple as a cup of tea from room service could take an awful long time. Something as simple to us all now as making a phone call from Bombay back to London could take half a day. Nowadays, you can just pick up a phone, or you probably get a mobile phone, but if you pick up the phone, you're through in seconds. And, so the cultural shift has been enormous. And yet the cultural history remains what it has always been. And what I also enjoy is let's put it this way, the love for cricket in those three countries, in Pakistan, in India, in Bangladesh, for instance, in Sri Lanka, the 4 countries that are the subcontinent, the cricket playing country. And now, of course, you have to add Afghanistan as well. But the huge love for cricket means that when people like me come to this part of the world, if I was in India now, I'd be going, yes, thank you very much, thank you very much, thank you very much, very kind. People remember, as you well know, your parents' generation remember what we were doing 30, 40 years ago. Memories are good, the feelings are good, and the welcome for cricketers and those associated with the game is extraordinary. So it is just a joy to be able to come to this part of the world and be associated with cricket. And then if you can, because what I've always liked to do as well on my visit previously is go off into different places and in return, learn more about the history of this part of the world. So I've always found that fascinating. And the other thing that I have always been associated with for many, many years now is wildlife conservation. So for instance, in India, we used to do, in the days when tours had games you could miss, or there was time in between games sometimes, I visited the tiger reserves at Ranthambore, at Kana, at Pench, to get that experience under my belt as well, and always been supremely well looked after. So again, the word privilege will come back again because it's been an absolute privilege to be able to do that.
Yeah.
Absolutely, and David, we'll just carry on with that particular theme. I like to leave the India-England series and of course the pitch debate that has been dominating the news all throughout over the last week and a half, especially during the 3rd Test match. I'll leave that to the last. A question that's been a pressing issue for international cricket, and of course, I think more so with Indian cricket as well, considering India was one of the last teams to accept the DRS system and the implementation of the whole decision review system when it came to Test matches, or even beyond the ICC tournaments, if you were to say so. But the umpire's call aspect of the DRS has come under a lot of scrutiny. It has created a lot of debate, and to an extent that we can call it controversial again. Even the players sometimes you see them on the field, they're quite baffled by a few of the calls. We've seen captains having rows, or maybe even players having rows with other players or with the officials, or just overall the scenario becomes a little heated. A lot of experts reckon that whether the ball's hitting the stump flush on or whether it's just flicking the stump and clicking the bail off, you're out both ways. So this whole concept of the 50% error rule on the umpire's call, whether it's pitched 50% in line, impacted 50% in line, or gonna hit the stumps 50% or more, only then the decision goes in favor of the bowler. In your personal opinion, should that be done away with? Because essentially, if the 5% of the ball hits the stump or 95% of the ball hits the stump, as long as the bail is dislodged, it is out. That is what many of the former cricketers also reckon. And just the overall concept of it, do you feel somehow that we've seen in other sports, they have imbibed technology? Tennis has done so quite successfully. Football, a lot of questions and doubts and weekly debates remain there as well. So as far as cricket is concerned, how do you think that there is definitely is a scope for improvement in the DRS system? And if you were to be given the reins, would you do away with the umpire's call?
Right. Okay. Good question. Very good question. First of all, as you say, all video review systems around the world in different sports are always subject to their own review, because there is still an element of interpretation. So the third umpire's job is not as easy necessarily as people think it should be, but it's very easy to see when they've got it wrong. And you don't need me to tell you there have been instances in the last few weeks where that implementation, use of it could have been better, could have been improved. Because as soon as anyone says, well, hang on a second, why have you not done this, or why have you not done this? That causes an issue. Now, that of course is just down, that is down entirely to the cooperation of third umpire and TV director and whatever's available. And there's always room for improvement. What I would say though about this umpire's call thing is this. I understand those that want it to be simpler, in the sense that, if the technology shows you that a ball is hitting the stumps, well, that should be good enough. But I do have a problem with it, because when this came in, let's face it, before DRS, we just had umpires. Umpires could be very, very good. They could be good. They could be indifferent, mediocre, or plain bad. But you just live with that. And how many times had we all been through the situation where we said, "Look, I know that wasn't that." He said, you have a, you lose your faith in them because you just disagree. So DRS is designed to take out the sting of all that. And let's face it also, that the standard of umpiring across the entire world, in every continent, in every country, had improved or has improved markedly. And because they've been allowed to learn all about sort of the new things that come into the game. They've had new perspectives given by TV and by things like Hawkeye, and therefore they've been able to basically readjust the meters, as it were, on every decision they make. But my problem is this: if you just make it as simple as people are suggesting now, you'll have 2-day games on the flattest of pitches. It will tilt the whole thing towards the bowler yet more. And it's already affected the techniques of batsmen, especially playing spin. That's very, very obvious to anyone who ever played before DRS and after DRS. Techniques are very different. They have to be, because you have to play more with the bat. So it's none of this for hiding the bat behind the pat stuff, which used to go on in my time, previous generations, even worse. So it's opened that up, which is already good for spin bowlers, and it makes the game more interesting. But I also have this point to make, which is, the umpire is there to do a job on the field, and he is there to make a decision. And I quite like, this might sound outdated, it might sound like a bit of a throwback to previous generation, but I quite like the idea that the umpire's judgment is important. And therefore, he gets the first view of it, his decision. I don't want that decision to be, well, I don't want them to think up here, well, I don't have to make a decision. I might just go straight to Hawkeye, go straight to DRS. And we just get every decision made by DRS, because that would be horrible. That would be against what I call the feel of the sort of the history, the feel, the ethics of cricket. So I would like him still to have to think really hard with his conscience fully available, his hand on his heart, say, right, is that to me out or in? And that I think is a good thing to have. And therefore, because we know, because we know that Hawkeye is, what is it, 90, somewhere between sort of 97 and 99% accurate, just to account for that 1%, just on the off chance, let's just, I'm actually pretty happy keeping the umpires cool. And some people might react to me saying, well, that's just a batsman speaking, because I don't be given out and condemned on sort of a quarter of an inch of deviation on a machine that's completely dispassionate, on a piece of electronic wizardry, which then might feel unfortunately unsound. So I still quite like the idea, just to simplify it, that the umpire has an important role to play. And yes, it does look, it does look confusing when you know that decision made that comes up with umpire's call would have gone the other way with Hawkeye, with DRS, with Eagle Eye, with all these things, if the decision originally had been different. That's what seems strange to people, especially people who don't understand the game. But those that go back a little bit further, I think would understand the concept that the umpire's role is quite important.
Indeed. Obviously, you have a better understanding of it, having been in the broadcast for so many years. But another question along those lines, David, you have been, as I said, you have been as a broadcaster, you have been along for been a part of Sky Sports team and various other broadcast teams for so long. And you've seen so many things change over the years. It's a bit of a twofold question. How much of a change have you seen, like right from the start of your broadcast career, to how different it is right now? And also, if you could mention some broadcaster that you do enjoy listening to.
Oh, right, yeah. Well, the changes have been immense, because when I first started, I was doing games while I was still a player, in between games where not required or on tours. I did a bit of radio, did a bit of TV, did all sorts. And the facilities, the sort of technology available, for instance, to the BBC in 1994, when I first went full time with them, it was limited. You had replays. Wasn't long before that, they only had a camera at one end looking at the pitch. So all the things, the number of cameras, of course, it's gone from half a dozen to a dozen to 20 to 30 to spider cam to, there are cameras everywhere, which I think is fantastic, just in giving different perspectives on the way the game looks. You can be artistic, you can be, it's been brilliant. And so things like all the innovations which have been, things like Snicko, like Hawkeye, so many generic names, the same thing. When I first went to Sky full time, and Channel 4 in the UK had they had some test matches, we had some one-day internationals. At that same season, which must be about 99, somewhere around there, Sky were developing something called with a company called Kinetic, who were basically Hawkeye, were basically a missile tracking government organization in the UK. Channel 4 had Hawkeye, a guy called Paul Hawkins, who had a little lab in a government facility 2 miles from where I now live. And for the first year, these two things went side by side. And then they decided, well, actually, hang on a second, if we share, we split the cost and all the rest of it, that made sense. So actually Hawkeye won out on that one. Of course, have become they become like a generic term like Hoover. It's everyone talks about Hawkeye, even though there are, of course, other systems being used. Things like Snicko, things like Hotspot, which came and went because it was too expensive. But they've all added to the understanding of the game, primarily for television viewers. Now, of course, as part of the decision-making process. So that whole ball tracking thing is now an integral part of the game. So that's obviously very, very different. And the ability with the development of cameras, again, going back to the early 90s, you had slow motion, but you didn't have spin vision. You didn't have these multiple frames per second, which can show, Murali's fingers, or the release, the slow, these infinite number of varieties of slower balls from the pace bowlers nowadays. You can spot it. You can look at a hand, on TV. You can see whether the fingers are here, there, whether it's a proper knuckleball, whether it's cut across. The whole thing has moved on. And actually, just as an aside, the skill of those camera operators, because I once did it at Old Trafford. I stood behind the spin vision camera on a quiet afternoon where, and I tried for about 2 overs to follow the ball with this massive great camera, which is, the ball is the only thing in the picture pretty much. And the skill you have to follow from a bowler's hands down the pitch. And if it's an inside edge onto the pad going to short leg, you're meant to go with that as well. No way. That is an infinite skill. That is an extraordinary skill that very few people master. So they are in demand across the world for those skills to operate that camera. So all these things are just, and the technology itself, of course, the quality of the cameras has gone up and the size of them comes down. And now we've got drones. It's just it's brilliant. And I think the sort of one of the great things is the communication now with players too has changed. They understand much better that they are part of the show, and that whereas, for instance, in my era, it was sometimes an imposition to try and explain away why, as an England captain, you've just lost a test match. Nowadays, they have a formula, albeit sometimes far too anodyne. It's if you have a successful game, it's all to do with the team. And I'd love to see. I enjoy it when you've got someone with a bit of character who wants to say, "Look, I had a fantastic day. I got 150. I loved every moment of that. Oh yeah, team's done all right. That's fine. Yeah." But everyone has to say, as a sort of rote, "Oh no, it's all about the team. I was just very lucky to be there, and so and so helped me through the first partnership," and that gets a bit repetitive. You just kind of want the maverick to be sort of someone special on show, and so a good interview can change our perspective of a day as a broadcaster. But who's good nowadays around the world? Well, there are some fabulous voices around the world. I have to say, of my former colleagues at Sky, the man I admire most is Michael Atherton. He both speaks well and, for the Times in London, writes brilliantly. And he has what I would call the characteristics you really need, which are a brain, a use of language, knowledge of the game, knowledge of the players, an immediate and quick understanding of circumstances and situations, and the ability to either write or speak that very, very quickly. So, for instance, when I was at Sky and interviewing people in studios, I mean, they're all fun to have. They're all good to have. And Michael, I just have to say, was the most polished in the sense that he seemed to know all the answers. And I used to enjoy the conversations that I had with him in that studio. So I rate him very highly. I mean, having spent 20 years at Sky, they are my ex-family now. But so the likes of sort of, I don't know, Nasser, David Lloyd, they're all friends as well as colleagues. But across the world, I'll tell you the other guy who's brilliant at the moment, and that you mentioned that World Cup final earlier. Ian Smith has just that way of feeling the emotion. I mean, that commentary at the end of the World Cup final, I thought was brilliant, because anyone who's been in that situation knows that the one thing you don't want to do is mangle your words or miscue. And he nailed it. I mean, I think that was an extraordinary thing to have to. It's a privilege to be there at that moment at the conclusion of the tightest ever World Cup final. I mean, that's just extraordinary. But he, the words that came from his mouth at that time summed it all up brilliantly. And I thought as an aside, I thought the New Zealanders took defeat with hugely good grace. They dealt with that, certainly in public, very, very well indeed. And Ian, as a New Zealander, having to commentate on his team losing that World Cup final by a matter of inches, I just thought he did it supremely well. But wherever you go across the world, there are some brilliant voices and some, it's just getting the passion into the game and the understanding into the game. Because whether you're on radio or TV, you need to be, you want the viewer or the listener to be your friend, and you want them to be entertained.
Indeed.
Absolutely, and it's such a lovely story, and especially from coming from Ian Smith. I mean, it must have been, as you put it, must have been so difficult for him being a New Zealander himself. Any time you see, as a neutral, as when you were watching the match, we felt a little sorry for New Zealand, because that's such a difficult way to lose a World Cup final after all. And Jimmy Neesham summed it up in his tweet as well. He talked about it's quite a legendary tweet there as well. But it's easy. Ian Smith is definitely someone we've really enjoyed listening to over the years. And we couldn't possibly let a former English captain go without actually getting his views on the series that's going on, the hotly contested series in India. Currently we sit here after 3 test matches, India leading the series 2-1. England performing brilliantly in the first test match, take that test match, and since then collectively, we've not seen such impressive batting from either side. I would say, apart from Rohit Sharma and Ravichandran Ashwin, if you take the innings out in the second Test match, beyond that, we've not really seen any batsman really step it up and authoritatively, bat along through their entire innings like what Joe Root did in the first Test match. It's again a little bit of a two-pronged question. One, of course, your comments on the series, on the pitch, especially. There seems to be a massive debate. You mentioned Mr. Atherton. He wrote a wonderful article in the Times just on the third Test match, the impact of the pitch and the English selection, the inability of the batsmen from both sides to actually see out difficult periods in a Test match. We've also seen in the past few years, teams folding up within 2-3 days, regardless of the type of Test match it is, whether it's a red ball Test match or a pink ball Test match. So the question, of course, is your views on the series, and also in general in terms of batsmanship, because of so much a limited over cricket. Do you think we're losing this art of being patient and just seeing out rough periods in a match?
Yeah, all of the above. This is obviously, as you well know, a sort of multi-pronged, multifaceted question and answer, because the series. I mean, whenever anyone comes to India, I mean, traditionally it was always spin. Before my time, some of the great Indian spinners of all time, Bedi, Chandrasekhar, Prasanna, Venkatragavan. You went to India knowing, basically, you probably suspected, and this I say just before time, you would suspect that Sunday Gavaskar would open the bowling, gentle medium pace, 2 overs, and that would be it. And then you'd have spin and all the rest of it. So, and we talked earlier about the sort of resurgence or the development of pace bowling in India, which has been fantastic. So now you should have the ability to play, going back to my phrase from earlier, proper cricket. So a pitch which starts in good shape. Side batting first will expect to make some runs. Maybe you could go as far as, because what's amused me, I'll just say this, what has amused me is all the talk before Chennai first Test match, there were people talking about grass being left on the pitch. That didn't happen. What always happens is someone pitches up with the mower on the first day of the game, takes the grass off. That's going to happen. Before Ahmedabad, for the last Test match, someone said, there's a lot of grass on the pitch, and it's going to be a day-night game and a pink ball, and seamers in the only other game in India took 19 wickets. So everyone's geared up for that. No, someone pitches up with that same mower again, pitches bare, and then you realize that it's not particularly well prepared. So I'm not going to make any predictions for the next one, because I've seen a picture of the pitch in Ahmedabad 2 days ago. And who takes a picture 3-4 days before the game and says, this is what the pitch looks like? It is absolutely pointless. You can do anything you like to that pitch in 4 days. Exactly. You can probably grow cabbages on it. You can do whatever you want. You can do anything. So look, coming to India, you expect conditions that are going to test you. And that first Test match, yes, England profited by winning the toss, by being able to bat on good conditions. Joe Root played brilliantly. Everyone knows that. Joe Root played absolutely brilliantly. That's fine. And that's the reward for someone who is in very good form at that stage. Rohit played brilliantly in the next Test match. Things happen. You get runs on the board. Wherever you are in the world, you put pressure on the team batting second. So that happens. That's fine. I just thought, like so many, that the balance of the game in that third Test match was shifted so far towards the bowlers. And whether it was cynical, whether it was premeditated, I'm not going to get involved in that argument, but the evidence is there. And as we said already, if Joe Root gets 5 for 8 on the second morning of the game, that's not normal. Okay, at the end of the day, at the end of that same day, the game is finishing. Rohit and Shubman Gill are able to play with freedom, making 40-odd runs, and someone says, well, look, they can get runs easy. Well, different situation. So look, I mean, it's, England decided not to make a formal complaint, but obviously it's everyone's well aware that people weren't particularly happy. And if you asked, there's the irony of the irony is there's only one team made public concerns about a pitch, and that was India in the first Test match. But yet, things are said. It's like a sort of coded message. We know that someone says, well, so they sort of equivocate and they say things that send the message that they're not happy, but they don't actually say we're not happy. What would be really nice to see for the fourth Test match is one of those pitches that gives everyone a chance. Whether that's being naive, whether that will come into play, we will see very, very shortly. But I don't know. I mean, I can't say anyone in the world was happy watching 2 days. I know the fans that came to Ahmedabad, and great to have a 50,000 crowd, whatever it was, and fantastic to see people back in a magnificent stadium. But my feeling is that magnificent stadium deserved more than just 2. Even if they went home happy because it was a match and are now 2-1 up in a series and almost in the World Cup, the World Test Series final. That's all good in many ways for a home team. But actually, that stadium deserves a better game. It's a great stadium, huge, great, brilliant stadium. That deserves at least 4 days of proper cricket. That's my view.
Indeed.
Yeah, actually, one other thing. One other thing. People talked about techniques. Well, I have a lot of respect for these people that have to talk about the game, and I understand obviously the rules about that. But one of the things is that if you were playing spin even 10 years ago, 15 years ago, before DRS, said it before, it's a very different technique now that you have to use. Therefore, you cannot do the things that you used to first of all survive, because one will get through and someone will give you out LBW and DRS will say, I'm sorry, but you're out. So even if there are things that are different like that. And I think, I think one of the great things I did early in my broadcasting career was have the privilege of sitting next to Richie Benaud. And Richie was acknowledged as possibly the best of all time, great gift with words, but again, a brain that understood the game all the way through his playing career, captaincy career, broadcasting career. And he was always very keen to move with the game, move with the times, understand new things. And that's a great thing to remember you have to do. So that's what we all have to do. Techniques will change, but the things you can control, you can say to a groundsman, right, we need a pitch that gives them a chance of playing for 4 days of proper game. There will be days where players get it wrong. That's the human element. There'll be days where they get it exceptionally right. And a great performance, a great individual performance can change a game.
Absolutely. And, on that note, as Ravichandran Ashwin also probably mentioned in the press conference as well, we hope that it's a good test match. And as you mentioned, we hope that the fans get to see a 4 or 5 day game, because to be very honest, there has been a little bit of a void as well, because we all expected the test match to go into the weekend. And yesterday was supposed to be the 5th day, which is quite hilarious in that sense. And, so we'll just hope that we can get a competitive test match, and we can get we can get a match that lasts into the second last or the last day. Just to sum it up, David, thank you so much for joining us. Anurag did mention when he did do the introduction, it's such a massive coup for us as a channel, and such a huge honor that you agreed for this interview. This is by far the biggest interview we've done. And I'm sure if any of the viewers do end up watching this video even later during the line, this will always stay relevant, because this discussion and the points from your end have been absolutely fantastic for us. So once again, from the bottom of our hearts, and thank you so much for joining us. We hope that you have a very pleasant stay in Pakistan and everything goes off swimmingly well there as well. Just massive thank you from our end.
Okay, well, my pleasure. One final point just to make. In terms of India and their ambitions to be in that World Test Championship final, I think, to be fair, whatever happens in this coming Ahmedabad Test match, I think looking at, for instance, from Australia, looking at the performances over the last couple of years, it would be right if New Zealand play India in that final. I think that's, it's not all about one game in Ahmedabad. It'd be right to say those are the two teams that have done the things they need to do to be in that final. So let's just say, let's get there. Let's let them get there by orthodox methods, by winning a good game or drawing a good game, and we'll all be happy. But look, may I wish you all well, with your channel, with your ambitions, and just keep that love of the game. Whatever you do, keep that love of the game.
Absolutely. And thank you so much. Thank you so much. I'm sure on behalf of Anurag and myself, and of course the entire Sports Joint team, thank you so much for coming on.
Okay, my pleasure. Take care. Right, bye-bye.